Guys, I have to apologize. For the past 2 years, I have been telling everyone, all our viewers, the Sluggers community, that the fielding stat doesn't matter. And it's with a heavy heart that I have to admit the fielding stat does matter. I know it's terrible. I've deceived everyone. I take full responsibility. So that is just one of the discoveries we have made recently on the Mario Sluggers stats table. I'm really excited actually to talk about it today because a video we made a while back talked about how Little Cokes just discovered the stats table, and since then we have categorized a bunch of different stats. Some have some real importance in the Mario Sluggers, meta game, picking teams, character comparisons, all that stuff. So let's get right into it. I'll talk about the fielding stat later because that is actually really complicated. Let's start with just discussing the different categories we have found. We've found a bunch in hitting, pitching, and fielding. Let's start with hitting. So there's 5 different hitting based stats that we have identified: the charge hit power, the slap hit power, the charge hit contact size, the slap hit contact size, and then what we think is a bunting stat. And so we've taken some of the ideas from the Superstar Baseball stat sheet. So there's a lot of parallels there, which is how we were able to figure out these stats, because changing them and then seeing what changes is sort of tough here. It's possible, but it's sort of tough. So let's talk about the most important one first, which is the charge hit power. This is the actual power of a hitter. It might be some sort of multiplier that I'll get into in a second. But at the top, the number 1 charge hit power player is Bowser. He has a 98 stat. And other power hitters are up there. K. Rool is second at 94, and Petey has 92. So technically, Bowser has the highest power stat. I think that means he can hit the ball the hardest. Not exactly sure what it means, but something along those lines. And at the bottom, all the way at the bottom, is, you might not guess this, is Waluigi with a 1 charge hit power stat, which is way below anyone else. And the reason this is, if you've hit with Waluigi, you probably know that his slap hit is pretty much just as powerful as his charge hit. So when you want to say, if it's a multiplier, maybe you're increasing the power of Waluigi's slap hit by 1 and it becomes his charge hit power. I think that makes sense, and that it would explain why he's at the bottom. And of course, near the bottom, Baby Luigi with 20 and Baby Peach with 25. Which is expected because those guys are really, really weak. And when it comes to contact zones, I believe that's really important too, and that stat's also in Superstar Baseball. When it comes to charge hit contact, Waluigi is actually at the top. For some reason, it's easy to hit with him, but not easy to send it far. And that's pretty much the theme here, is that the heavy hitters have a small contact zone. You might have experienced that when you're trying to hit a dinger with K. Rool. It's really not easy because his contact zone is tiny. And K. Rool actually has the lowest contact zone of the game. He has an 18, and Fire Bro and Boomerang Bro have 20. So they're the 2 next lowest. And you might say, well, how is this possible with them being so low? Shouldn't that mean that Peach, who has a really high contact zone, is really a better hitter in some way? Well, Bowser in Superstar Baseball also has one of the lowest contact zones in the game, and he is by far the best player in that game. So it doesn't mean everything, but I do think in Sluggers it means more than Superstar Baseball, which might explain why K. Rool and Bowser aren't necessarily the best players in Sluggers. And next up is slap hitting, which can be important. It's probably not as important to me, but Waluigi has the highest slap hit power multiplier, however that works. And a lot of the, it might actually, I don't know how much of a multiplier it is, because a lot of the power hitters are close with 80 plus, except for the bros, who all have a 10, along with Baby Luigi for the lowest slap hit power, which is kind of strange. And there's also slap hit contact size stat, where Waluigi is at the bottom with 5, and Peach and Boo are at the top. So those are the main hitting stats, and there's one extra that I can't exactly pin down, but I believe is bunting, because it makes sense. And Goomba has the highest bunting stat with a 90. Blooper and Monty are way below with a 60. So Goomba is way ahead of everyone else. It's pretty impressive. and the power guys are at the bottom as you'd expect. I'm not exactly sure what the bunting stat means. Maybe it's the trajectory with bunting. If you have a higher bunting stat, it's easier to hit it maybe fair or even into the ground in some way. I don't bunt very often, so I don't think it is that influential, but still interesting. All right, next up is the fielding category. We have the main fielding stat, also speed, which I'd count as a fielding stat because it mostly comes into play in the field. Throwing speed, which is the third one, which is actually very important. So fielding stat, the players with the highest fielding stat are Diddy Kong, who has an 84, and Baby DK with an 82. And there's a couple, characters you'd expect with 80s. And the fielding stat and speed stat pretty much match up to what the game tells you. It's not 100% consistent, but the better fielders in general, the best fielders have an 8 fielding stat. And K Rule is the lowest. K Rule and Purple Toad both have 2, but K Rule has a 20 and Purple Toad has a 25. So there's some weird rounding stuff where, two characters with the same fielding stat in the game might not actually have it in the game's code. And the speed is pretty much the same too. Yoshi has the best with a 90. Pink Yoshi, though, even though they're both the same, they both get 9s in the game stat bars. Pink Yoshi only has an 85, so slightly inferior. And then K Rule, again, is the worst with a 10. Red Magic Koopa has a 14. One interesting thing about both those stats is Red and Yellow Pianta, who infamously have the exact same stats, they seem like identical characters, actually differ in these categories. Yellow Pianta has a 25 for speed, and Red Pianta only has a 20. But Red Pianta makes up for slightly better fielding. They're pretty close still, but differ by a little bit. And then for throwing speed, unsurprisingly, Bowser has the highest with a 98, which sort of matches his with his charge hit power, but it's not exact. And K Rule and Petey both have 90. Baby Luigi has 20. Baby Luigi he's just bad. He is really bad. The last category is pitching. This is really important in my opinion because you can't always tell who the best pitcher is. Some days you'll be pitching with Waluigi and he's just not on his game and he'll give up a lot of runs. So it's sometimes tough to tell who the best pitcher is, but I think this gives a definitive answer to who is the best pitcher. And we can see that with the curve stat. This is the most important pitching stat, I'd say. And Boo has by far the best curve stat with an 89. I'm not exactly sure what it measures. It's probably just some angle that you can curve it at. It's not Toadsworth, it's not a Magic Koopa, it is Boo with 89. And second is the two main Magic Koopas with 81. And the worst, unsurprisingly, is Petey with a 5. And Peach and Baby Peach are also high up there too. And there's 3 other pitching stats: curveball speed, fastball speed, and what might be stamina. Curveball speed, I don't think is I think it can be important, but it doesn't mean you're a better pitcher. For example, Petey has the fastest with a 150, and Funky is up next with 142. Toadsworth obviously is last with a 70, and Goomba with a 90. Personally, I think Toadsworth can be dominating sometimes, but I don't like Goomba much as a pitcher. I'd prefer someone with a high curveball speed and a high curve stat as well. I think that mixture is really good. Also fastball speed, Petey has the highest, K Rule is next, and Toadsworth and Waluigi, unsurprisingly, are last. And it's good to mix up speeds as well, but sometimes higher speed can do you good. And the last category, which I am nowhere near sure on, is stamina. This was the mystery category I mentioned in the first stat video, where Goomba has 100 and Bowser has a 99, and they're way ahead of anyone else. And I think this is stamina. And the reason I think that is because, honestly, there's nothing else it really could be, and it's the one stat I can't find. So it's all the heavy hitters at the top, except Goomba has 100 and Paragoomba has 70 for some reason, which is 8th or something like that. And the babies in King Boo are last with 20. And so a strange theory I have is that Goomba and Paragoomba, they don't have arms, so their arms can't get tired when pitching. That's my only theory. I don't know. It doesn't really make sense, but I can't think of why else they would be there. Alright, so let's wrap this video up by talking about the fielding stat. Of course, I've always thought that the fielding stat didn't matter because in Mario Superstar Baseball, the fielding stat that the game said corresponded to nothing. And that is true because the Superstar Baseball stat table has no mention of fielding stat. However, there's one column in the Slugger stat table that does correspond to fielding. It's it's very close to the actual in-game fielding stat. And right as I was finding this, someone came into our Discord and discovered the game's fielding code using Ghidra or whatever. I've never tried it, but they found the actual fielding bobble code, and it gives insanely complicated equations for when characters will bobble, and you can see it does give references to the fielding stat, but the actual code of the bobble rates is 142 lines. It's insanely complex. I don't know why they did that. It's ridiculous. So the game will just put in the fielding stat of a character as part of a formula to determine if they will bobble. And there's randomness, and you can see here's like a rough version of a part of the code. This is the part of the code that when a fielder has a star swing right on them, and in general, the worst fielders have about a 70% chance of bobbling a star swing head on, which you can see if you plug a number into this formula. But this is only one case. There's a ton of cases. There's diving at a star swing. Diving might, in general, completely erase the fielding stat. Not quite sure about that. And then there's, a pop fly, which has really low bobble rates, depending on the no matter what the character is. And so you can see there's an element of randomness, but also an element of their fielding stat. And this is big because if you take most cases, someone with like the highest possible fielding stat, say like Diddy Kong Starred, say the stat of 100, which is Starred Diddy is 94, so it's pretty close. Someone with a stat of 100 would bobble half as much as someone with a stat of 30, which is the worst possible stat. Because the game, I don't think the game even considers any fielding stats under 30. I think it just bumps them up to 30, even though K. Rool and Purple Toad are below that. So there's about a half of, like 50% difference separating the two. So it's really important to pick someone with a high fielding stat, which kind of changes the tier list now. So I'll have to make a new tier list just based on this info. And yeah, it's kind of crazy. And something I was wondering after I looked at this is, well, what about characters like Birdo, Magikoopa, or the Bros? They don't really bobble. Usually you'd have to touch the ball to bobble it. They have like ranged catches. So someone like Birdo can't bounce off Birdo, but it can bounce off Yoshi. However, Llama Trauma, who's the same person who found all this stuff about the fielding stat, discovered that all those characters can bobble. But it doesn't look like they bobble. It just looks like they missed the ball. So if you've ever been playing as Birdo and you're like, God, how did you miss that? It's actually would have been a catch if you got luckier. It's just the bobble, but there's no special animation. So that's really interesting, and might bump Birdo down a little bit in the fielding ranking. I'm not quite sure. I'd have to think about that more. But characters like Shy Guy now or Baby DK, I think they could make it into the top 10 fielders list. I think Baby DK needs some reconsideration with his top tier fielding. And so after all of this, you might be thinking, isn't it possible to edit these stats and put it in the game? And the answer is yes, which I mentioned before. And Chiz has done a couple videos on it. We have not done a video on it, but I do want to soon, as soon as I figure it out better. But Little Cokes also found that you can increase the stats way beyond 99, up to 32,000, basically, because it's it's a signed integer. It goes up to that many bits or bytes. I don't know. And so there's a lot you could do with that. I'm still trying to figure it out. But here's a video of both like insanely high charge hit power for Daisy and then negative charge hit power. So you can get pretty crazy stuff, and I intend to explore that as much as I can. So yeah, I was really excited to share all these discoveries with you guys. I hope you enjoyed, and I am looking forward to what we can do with all of them, as well as bringing you guys a new tier list with the knowledge that fielding stat does matter. So thank you for watching. and see you next time.